Hey folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. Today, we are finding ourselves in one of those cultural moments where you can actually feel the movement of history. In this case, it's regarding race, and long overdue. And it's making for a great many conversations among integralists and everybody. And today I'm going to share one of my favorites with you. I was joined a week or so ago by two of my now favorite integral philosophers, Greg Thomas and Phil Anderson. Greg I've known. He's been a frequent guest on the Daily Evolver, mainly regarding African American culture and intellectual history in general, but also particularly on the integral aspects of the art form of jazz. And he has opened my, I was going to say eyes, but I guess ears, to a whole new world. And a lot of people feel that way. You could check out those on the site, those podcasts. And Phil Anderson, I'm meeting here for the first time. And he blogs about integral on the website Integral World. I would always welcome you to join the conversation. And you can write me at jeff@dailyevolver.com or leave me a voicemail by going to the Daily Evolver website, clicking the Connect tab, and there's a little orange box where you can leave me a voicemail, and I often play them on the show. So that's it by way of introduction. Thanks for joining us, and here's me with Greg Thomas and Phil Anderson. Well, I thought we might start with just sort of a round robin where we can each put our opening statement out there and see how that gets us going. I might start with you, Greg, if you don't mind, because you're the mastermind who pulled this together. I mean, you do both, Phil and I, we didn't know each other. So what brings us together, and what are you thinking, and how are we moving the ball here?
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate this chance to engage with you, Jeff, and Phil on the Daily Evolver. I'll try to make this as succinct as possible. I mean, my exposure to integral meta theory began a little over 20 years ago through Ken Wilber's A Brief History of Everything, which, by then, as I said in a recent blog post on my blog, tuneintoleadership.com, I had read hundreds of books by then, but that book blew me away. It truly blew me away. The breadth, the depth, the multi and interdisciplinary power of it. I was in grad school at the time at NYU doing a doctorate in American Studies. So what I was doing at the time was really deepening my grasp of literature, history, and anthropology, because I felt that I had lacked in those areas in undergrad. So I said, well, let me go deeper. And then I read this. I'm like, whoa, look at what this guy has put out here. So it gave me frames of understanding, frames of reference that answered a lot of questions for me. So that was the first thing. Then 10 years later, about 2010, I say, I'm checking out Integral Naked, I guess what then became Integral Life. And I said, I don't see a lot of Black folks here. I don't see a lot of content that has to do with my experience, the Black American experience in particular. And it was less from a racial perspective, because a colleague and friend of mine, Mark Palmer, had actually done an interview with Ken on Integral Naked about race. I was like, oh, good, thank you, somebody. And I had seen Ken interact with Michael Beckwith, Saul Williams, and a couple of other, Black folks. So it's not like there was a total absence. But I said, I'm an expert on jazz. So let me see if I can integrate what I know about jazz and the blues idiom philosophy of Albert Murray and Ralph Ellison within this integral frame. So I started contributing content thanks to Corey DeVos, the editor-in-chief of Integral Life. And I started, putting in this content. And then I met you, Jeff. Went out to Boulder 3 consecutive summers, with you and Steve McIntosh. Stayed at your home, bless you, thank you.
Good fun.
Yeah, been on Daily Evolver, on numerous occasions. So fast forward to 2020. I engage in a conversation on the channel Rebel Wisdom, which is based in the UK. And then this was posted on Facebook, and there was some discussion around it, and a conversation that I had as a part of Integral Justice Warrior, hosted by Diane Mushel Hamilton and Corey. And so as a part of this conversation, I'm engaging with Phil, who I'd say we've probably been Facebook friends for maybe 5-6 years. And we were going through some back and forth, and Phil was presenting some models of analysis in terms of white identity, Black identity, and also the integral model as relates to race in such a way that he helped me move from a really anti-race as a concept perspective at a green level to a real second-tier yellow level of appreciation for race, no matter its sordid history. Race as a way of looking at human beings in their difference in a way that's beautiful. And it moved me, it touched me, it actually brought me to tears. So, because it's something that helped my own evolution as far as that very difficult concept and subject, so thank you, Phil, once again. So that's kind of the short of it.
Yeah, right on. And then you called me and explained some of Phil's thinking, and I thought, wow, that's great. I want to explore it more.
Yeah,
and have, because we've emailed back and forth. And so I'll use this as a segue to you, Phil. And how would you like us to know you this morning?
Okay. Oh gosh. Well, I mean, I suppose perhaps following Greg's example and starting from the scratch. I studied electronic engineering. No interest really in philosophy or psychology or anything like that. No knowledge of it, right the way up to the midlife point. I think I was always interested in sort of reflecting on deeper questions, and I can kind of look at the things I wrote in my 20s and 30s, and I can sort of see now, I can see where this was going. But really, I suppose at a midlife point, and it was perhaps something of a midlife crisis. A lot of it precipitated, by my own middle age and realizing that whilst I'd spent the first half of my life going up, it was going to be downhill all the way, my body fading, coming to terms with my mortality. And then right at a fairly crucial point in that, my mother, who I was very close to, fairly unexpectedly died. And that just brought up all sorts of paradoxes for me. I was in a very fortunate position where I basically had a lot of free time and was able to take time off and reflect. I didn't have to keep working hard to make ends meet. So I was able just to reflect on these paradoxes. I mean, a good one is I feel real. I feel like I'm real. It's real that I exist. So how can it be that in 50 years' time I won't exist? There's a paradox there if you bother to go into it deeply. So I did. And also had this sense, my mother used to be a fan of Teilhard de Chardin, and trying to get to know her a bit in the last few months of her life, I was reading this and I kind of got slightly hooked into it. I thought, where's evolution going? And then I thought, this is sort of an engineering problem. I can look at this as a systems problem. If I can characterize what's happening and the process that's occurring, then I can predict and see where human race is going. So I thought, well, I thought, I'm sure I can do this. I sort of spent a year where I was thinking about this and thinking about this. And I was getting these sort of moments of sort of insight clarity, where I just would be walking down the street and suddenly had this slight sense of waking up out of a dream. So that was starting to happen. And then eventually, I arrived at a point where I was putting off doing my tax return. So I was looking for something I could do to keep me occupied, to avoid having to do my tax return. I thought, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to work this out. And what I came up with was this idea that reality is this layered system. And I represented it using engineering control theory. And the idea is that it's a control network, layered control network. And that as evolution progresses, new layers emerge. When I finally got the insight that this was what it was, and this is what evolution was, and this is what the planet was doing and where it was going, it just caused this huge sort of flash of clarity, mental clarity. And there was this sense of my perspective being transformed and suddenly looking at the world in a fundamentally different way. And so I started writing down all these ideas, and I sort of thought initially I've discovered something radically new here. I'm the first person that's seen this. But then I started looking around a bit, and I found Ken Wilber, and I think it's the Theory of Everything book, and I just remember reading that, and yes, and then the map, the spiral dynamics map, and seeing that spiral of the stages. I thought, oh my God, that's it. That's just another representation of what I thought. So it sort of feels to me that experience was an experience of second-tier thinking actually emerging in me in a fairly independent but very rudimentary fashion. And I then sort of spent less time thinking about my own ideas and more time just saying, right, okay, I've got to go into this and understand all the work that's been done by Wilber and all the other people in this domain. So that's kind of where it comes from. I think because of where I came to it from, I've got my own unique integral perspective, which is reflected in that work I've done. It's not all learnt out of books. It's sort of, I feel in a rudimentary fashion, I sort of independently arrived at it. And that sort of gives me a bit of a unique perspective. I'm not up at the sort of Ken Wilber polymath level, but I've got my own little unique perspective on it all. So that's really where it is, I guess.
Yeah. And isn't that how it's going to emerge?
Yes.
That people all over the place, whether or not they know of each other, whether they know of Ken Wilber, at some point you just see evolution. That's the key.
That's it. Yeah. Waking up as it, in a sense.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And seeing it in first, second, and third person, or however the four quadrants, however you want to slice and dice it. It's not just the physical evolution, it's the consciousness, it's the cultural.
Yeah.
And that's really what brings us to, I guess, the more narrow topic of what we wanted to talk about today. And that is the cultural movement that we're all seeing since the murder of George Floyd. And I've done a couple podcasts, and we've all written on it and communicated with each other about it. I guess the first question, what have you seen in the last 5 weeks? How have you yourself changed? And I guess I'd start with you, Greg.
Thank you. Wow. I, in a sense, have been kind of preparing for this moment where I publicly discuss race and culture with a level of depth that actually represents the decades of study that I've done with this, the conversations that I've had over decades. And I would say about 5 years ago, I think I probably made my first appearance on Daily Evolve about 5 years ago, first about jazz and then about American culture and democracy and race, and So, but at that time, I was engaged in research on a specific project I called Transcending Race.
Right.
That title was a program that actually my wife Jewel had when she was the executive and artistic director at the Riverside Theater of the Riverside Church in Manhattan. Transcending Race. So I said, yeah, that's what we need to do. Damn it, we need to transcend race. So I started working this out and had a conversation with my daughter. who was an undergrad at Dartmouth at the time. She majored in computer science. And she was like, Dad, I'm kind of worried. I said, why, baby? She says, because if you come out here and say transcending race, there are people I know and there are professors who will attack you for wanting to transcend race. I said, baby, I understand. Daddy's ready. Daddy's ready. But it took this moment after George Floyd and a confluence of things that just coming together and manifesting in terms of relationships I have, platforms I have access to, my own platforms in terms of my blog that I mentioned earlier. All of this stuff is just coming together. And it took me until the age of 56 where I got to a point, I'm at a stage where it ain't about ego. It's not about seeing my byline on an article. It's not about me looking at a tape and say, hey, look at myself. It ain't about that shit. It really isn't. We are at a place in our development and evolution as Americans and as a humanity where those who are in the know, not just from a cognitive level, from an embodied cognitive heart gut level, to talk about that, need to speak up. My blog is about leadership, and if you know, you have a responsibility to take action. And there's certain things that I know and I've come to that I've got to share. So that's kind of where I come into this. I don't remember what you asked, and if I answered it.
Well, that's all great, and it fills out where you're coming from.
Okay.
The specific question is, what are you seeing? Or what do you, Greg Thomas,
what have
see
I
now?
come to?
Yeah,
right. Thank you.
I think we're all in agreement that this has been a cultural moment that is just evolutionarily speaking, that it's a punctuation in the equilibrium. That we're moving fast forward here, and how's that showing up for you? What do you see?
Thank you. I would let's go in Phil's wheelhouse. Let's put it in systems terms.
Okay.
Let's speak about chaos theory and how in chaos theory and systems theory, when a system gets to a point of phase change, it's chaotic before it gets to that next phase of synthesis, of evolution. That's where we're at on so many levels. I mean, I've heard so many people say that, my God, with COVID alone and the economic impact, the social impact it's had, the cultural impact it's had destructively, if you want to take that perspective, and definitely it's like destructive. I'll say something that the great composer and jazz saxophonist, tenor saxophonist Wayne Shorter said recently. He says he sees COVID as a teacher for humanity. So there's so many things that came out from that alone. And then you add on top of it something that someone said, the only thing that could take COVID out of the news in the United States is race.
Oh my goodness. Who was that smart person? Who said
I know, right? I can't remember right at the moment. But it's just true. So I feel that there's been a compression of movements that have been developing for a while. There are futurists who looked ahead to 2030 and said, by 2030, this will happen because of AI and this will happen. It was like, whoop, 10 years were compressed. And then that's future back. Then there's the past forward, where movements that have been gelling and congealing for hundreds of years as regards race have resurfaced in a way where more white folks, probably than ever before, and certainly since the civil rights movement in the United States, are open to self-reflection, to questioning themselves, to looking at what can and should be done right now to make things better. Yes, for Black folks, but really for the nation as a whole. It's not just about helping those people. Those people are American citizens and are part of the whole and contributors to the whole. So I'm excited. There's a lot of stuff going on that, I don't agree with, that I can critique and that many do critique. But I'm excited because the possibilities are so great for us to make positive evolutionary change.
Wow, hallelujah. So Phil, what's that bringing up for you?
So yeah, some of the same things. I mean, it just felt like punching through a wet paper bag. It was so easy for the obvious injustice just to burst out into the news and be accepted as an injustice. There was no sense of pushback. It was just like everyone allowed it to be seen as what it was. So that is a phase transition. It sort of met no resistance, this explosion out, and everyone being prepared to look at it. There's this sort of sense of, oh, right, okay, no, we aren't still quite done with this yet. I think, most white people have felt that. There's this, okay, perhaps we thought it was okay, but it isn't yet. We still actually have to go further with this. There's another side to it, though, that I've seen. I mean, my political position is radical centrist. My own cognitive bias is liberal left-leaning. If I do one of those political compass tests, I come out in the lower left quadrant. So that's my politics in terms of my inherent cognitive biases. But I am what I heard someone describe as situationally right-wing in 2020. And the reason for that is because I feel that the left has won the culture wars. I feel that that the left has been working for the last sort of 50 or 60 or 70 years, whatever it is, against the conservative, sort of narrow-minded conservative perspectives that were racist, sexist, homophobic, all of that. And it's sort of won it. There's an ideological battleground out there, and the left have won it. But my sense is that just as the conservatives in the 50s didn't think they had to listen to progressives of the era, because conservatives felt they had the moral righteousness, the moral high ground. I feel we're now in that situation with that we liberals are treating the conservatives. And what I've learned in the last few years is that whilst there are still some of the old world conservatives out there, there's a whole new breed of conservative that is coming to liberal thinking with yes and. They're coming to liberal thinking. They're saying, yes, gay rights, that's a good thing. Equal equality for people regardless of sex or race, that's a good thing. We're actually behind that. That's absolutely fundamental. And so they're sort of going beyond it. And it feels to me that the liberal worldview is resting on its laurels. So, and it's become overconfident, like the conservative worldview had in the 50s. So part of the view on race, this whole race thing, what I've been doing, one thing that I've been doing is reading up a lot of commentary from Black conservatives. Now, I do not want to hear it really from a white conservative that there is no such thing as racism in 2020. And there are Black conservatives who are saying that. And I actually have to say, do you know what, guys? Okay, so I know why you're saying that, but it's actually not completely true. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of these people are saying that. There's a lot of Black people saying this, that, and they're countering all these liberal arguments. So I've been sort of making an effort to listen to those and to consider them. And one thing which I've discovered in that process is that there's very one-sided reporting on the whole issue of police brutality and race, even in a media which has got a sort of a contractual obligation to take a neutral position, like the BBC has to be politically neutral. It's presenting, I would say, a sort of progressive green slant on the story, and it is omitting the conservative slant. And the problem is that one-sided reporting is itself inflammatory. One fact which lots of black conservatives are reporting, we've got this fact that in America, if you're black, you're 3 times more likely to get shot dead by a policeman. And that's horrific. And that fact in isolation is deeply disturbing for anyone. And it's making people very angry. And a lot of the media are reporting that fact in isolation. The BBC certainly is. It's not saying anything else about it. But what the black conservatives I've been reading are saying is, well, the thing is that the black community are committing about 3 times as much more violent crime. So they're and I'm not judging that at all, because there may well be reasons of systemic racism and lack of employment opportunity as to why black people are desperate and behaving like that. So I'm not judging it. I've got no doubt there's systemic racism in the police, absolutely no doubt, because I have fully read that side of it. And just my understanding from the way norming dynamics work, and the fact that the police force is going to be mostly sort of reddy blue sort of individuals that have probably got some quite ethnocentric perspectives in there. So, to me, there's no question about that's going on. But is it as horrific as it's been portrayed in the media? And my hunch is that in some respects it's not. And the one-sided reporting is very dangerous. So that, in summary, that's where I am with it. It's this sense of the liberal perspective has finally punched through the wet paper bag and met no resistance, which is a wonderful achievement, and it's sort of about time. And that we have to take stock. We have to still say the work is still not done. But I think we've got to be aware that there's this other dynamic coming in now, which is the blind spot of the left, and the single-sided reporting is steering up. Is creating a lot of sort of racial antagonism and anger about the situation. Not all of which is factually justified. So it's sort of that's kind of how I see it. It's a complex situation. And I see it very firmly from those two perspectives. One of triumph, and one there's a new danger appearing.
Yeah. What I have seen and how I look at it is that every stage comes online in history with a totalitarian aspect. And if you think of how red comes online, it sure ain't pretty. When you think of how blue traditionalism comes online, just suppression of magic, burning the witches, all of that sort of thing. When you think of orange even coming online, the modern worldview in the sense of its technological achievements and global reach and ability to impact the biosphere, but no just ignorance around that, ignorance of culture. And so its pernicious aspects are just everywhere. Is green going to come on without a totalitarian aspect?
Yeah.
No, it's not. And the one thing I'd say that gives me a little bit of hope is that it's going to be less pernicious. But I have to say, I agree with you, Phil, in the sense that I've been surprised. I knew this was going to happen, but I'm surprised at the speed of it and the hegemony of the green sensibility on mainstream media, including the BBC. In what they're doing, and I know it's they're countering millennia of history of triumphalism, where cultures told themselves stories of their greatness and other people's weakness and the greatness of their God, and it's worth all of that horseshit. And so Green's doing its job by countering these triumphalist stories that are still deeply in our heart. When I think of the education I was given about America, I think one of the great things of sorting all this out, and I think people are sorting it out, is that we're getting, with these statues, and what do we do with these forefathers? What do we do with Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence guy who bought and sold people? I mean, so we got to figure that out. And we realize that there's at least 2 stories that are going on at the same time. And development is such a good explainer. It has such explanatory power, also in terms of race. But I'd love to hear from you too, Greg.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you both. Regarding what Phil said, I see that too. I agree with your analysis. I would be a little more precise in the language. I think that those statistics that you were referring to in terms of the homicides and violence within the Black community, as opposed to it being the Black community, I would say that there are a particular group of mostly young Black males who are committing those crimes. Young Black males who are often from a particular family setting. Dad ain't home, and there's a lack of discipline, because there are single parent households where, with a particular structure of discipline, with a particular value system, with a particular extended family dynamic, grandmothers and that type of thing, that doesn't happen necessarily.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you heard the conservative argument, the conservatives have an argument of just exactly that. And again, as you can expect with the conservatives, they blame the liberals for the single parent Black families.
Right. Yeah, and of course, they never necessarily point out the fact that since the 60s on through the 70s, that single parent households have been endemic, not just to Black families, but to families overall. In the statistics. So,
and I also wonder, what are the crime statistics among the rednecks that I grew up with? And the wild young men in those communities. It's again, development. I mean, a red center of gravity, you're actually supposed to go out and fight. You don't really want a job, not in the way that we think of a job. You're a hunter, you're a fighter. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, if you look at often the urban settings in which the dynamics that we're talking about occur, there's a big premium on respect.
Yeah.
Don't disrespect me.
Yes.
Don't diss me. Because, you're if you diss me, that means that you're looking down upon me. If you're looking down upon me, then I've got to bring you down for looking down on me. It's more complex, but those are some of the basic dynamics that have been studied. So I would agree that there is what Coleman Hughes, a young man who has been getting a lot of exposure over the last year and a half, 2 years, recent Columbia University grad. I happen to know him, but I know his father better. His father's actually a client of mine. He calls it coverage bias. So there's a definite coverage bias where I think the name of the gentleman who died in the same manner as George Floyd, about 6 or 7 years, Tony Timpa, I think is his name. Same. Begging for his life, caught on videotape. And the officers, white officers, and Tony Timpa was white, laughing afterwards. That never got national coverage. That's an injustice, okay? That type of egregious example of police brutality deserves to have coverage, because then you go to the larger issue of police brutality and police responsibility to do what they say in the New York Police Department: serve and protect. You're supposed to be in service and you're supposed to be protecting. You're not supposed to be enforcing the will of those who are the beneficiaries of what Isabel Wilkerson in this past Sunday's New York Times book review called the American caste system, which is based on hierarchical dominator dynamics, you know? So yeah, I mean, we're able to have this conversation where, you called yourself a radical centrist, where I literally, my blog post yesterday was titled "Why I Am a Radical Moderate." That's literally the title. So, and I make the case and I explain how I came to it and all of that. So I totally agree with you there. I would also say that I live in the lower left. Culture is my thing. And this is what I say in the piece, that on some issues, I'm on the right. Some issues, I'm on the left. And the two examples I give, the left liberal desire to expand the social contract, the promises of the social contract, the Western and American in particular, democratic social contract, to more and more people who've been excluded, marginalized. I totally agree with that. And on the right, I agree with the power and function of business, particularly small business, entrepreneurial business and entrepreneurship as a part of a free enterprise system. Now, the actuality is that neoliberal capitalism is not a free enterprise system because monopolies have been able to get in there. And then you have folks who have been able to pair private enterprise with the government. And so there's not the competition that a free enterprise system is supposed to be. But just in terms of its theoretical modeling, entrepreneurship and free enterprise go together. So I'm all with that. So you know what I mean? So I think we can have these mature conversations as adults, as integralists, where we can say where on the left we agree, where on the right we agree, where we disagree. And one of the things that I want you all to know that I intend to do, in addition to the blog that I have, tuneintoleadership.com, my wife and I were going to launch a podcast. And I may launch one or two interview shows, that where the purpose would be, in one case, one of the shows I have in mind, is to bring together voices that not only don't you see brought together on mainstream media, you don't see it on social media, you don't see it on YouTube. There are certain people who are reasonable people, intelligent, informed, on both sides, who never get together to have a conversation. I want to help make that happen because I feel that I can use a term that a young man named Peter Limberg coined, mimetic mediation. We can mediate between these meme levels, these value system and worldview levels, so that if we are truly integralists, we can speak that language, understand it, be able to repeat it back in a way that the person who you're saying it to feels that they've been heard. You know where I'm coming from, right? And to do that on the other side too. Let them engage, literally mediate, facilitate, curate, so that you can have an antithesis, a thesis, antithesis to a synthesis. The conversations need to happen. Yeah. So I hope and intend to be a part of making those type of conversations happen.
Yeah, it feels like it's becoming particularly important at the moment. There's so much polarization. And I think the more people who are able to occupy the center ground and see all perspectives, the better now. I feel even in the integral community that the center ground's been lost. It feels like we split into a left wing and a right wing polarity. I'm quite amazed to see that happening, in a community that prides itself on being able to take multiple perspectives, that it's split into these old-fashioned historical political perspectives.
Are you seeing that in social media, Phil?
Sorry?
Are you seeing that in social media, Phil?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's just been this whole split in the integral community. A lot of it was around Jordan Peterson. Is Jordan Peterson integral or not?
Right.
And all the sort of right-leaning conservative integral theories, well, of course he's integral. Whereas the sort of liberal left-leaning, he's not integral at all. He's blue. So there's that big sort of disagreement that happened there. And there was a split at that point. Of the community sort of breaking out. And I was, I'm sort of slightly shocked to see it really, because it challenges our premise. If we can't use multiple points of view.
I think it's terrible that God uses human beings to advance civilization. I just object.
I got to tell you, Phil, I I 100% agree with you. Is that's where the split surfaced. And so it so happens that I had been doing my own, research on Jordan Peterson before he got, as we say in the vernacular Black community, before he got large. He got large there, right? So why was I looking into him? Because I've got a real interest in myth, not myth just from the perspective of its origins, say, in the earlier values. I'm talking about the inclusive part of myth. In other words, we transcend that stage, but we include myth because you're not going to get away from story.
Yeah.
You're not going to get away from narrative. Good luck if you think you can, okay? Yeah. And therefore, we have to be able to incorporate certain aspects of myth. So he is someone who's lectured on myths for years. I was checking out his YouTube videos. I'm like, but you know something? As he was lecturing, I could feel and sense an undercurrent of sadness with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, this guy's carrying some stuff, And then he got big. And then I saw is he integral? Is he not integral? And you know what I did? I backed off. I said, ain't no way I'm going down that rabbit hole with you. No. And I'm not even going to tell you that I've been researching the guy, because I'm just watching you guys back and forth over this figure who's become a public figure, on his perspective on political correctness, this and that, because he is actually resonating with your own critique or not resonating with your own critique. Therefore, he is or isn't integral based on you thinking you're integral. So therefore, if I agree with him, he must be integral or not integral. Come on.
I stuck my hand right in the blender and did 2 full episodes on him. I think we're all in agreement. He has integral sensibilities and he's stuck in places. Join the club. Yeah. But let me just turn things to what you were just talking about with Greg, with myth and culture in general, because I know that's where you live. And this is a thesis I came up with on the Daily Evolver when I was doing my contemplations on race relations and integrals point of view. The idea that, and I think I saw it in your work too, Phil, that part of what we need to do as human beings and as a culture, and I think we're actually doing it, is to light up these earlier stages of magic, myth, and do Black Americans have a special sort of stream or gift there, Greg, simply because developmentally they were pulled out of a tribal early red kind of a situation and then move forward. And, you can move your body, but the soul, and we even call it soul, sort of. Is there some X factor there that we need to notice?
Absolutely. I would say that you had a combination of tribal red, but you also had blue, amber, whichever color you want to use at that stage. You had actually both of those dynamics because you had social structures and societal structures that were definitely more advanced than the tribal, though the tribal, of course, was there. So I want to mention that you had, as Philip and I had some online engagement about, you had the Mali Empire. It was an empire. 40% of Black Americans descended from that particular area of Africa. So you're not talking about tribal there, okay? But the point is, it was not modern. It was not orange. So you have a group of people, you have a group of different people from some at, the tribal place, some at the more formal social structures with a mythic orientation. Some Africans had adopted Islam, which is one of the 3 major Western religions, and that has a certain up-leveling effect in and of itself. But they were put into a situation where you have different groups, different languages, different cultures brought together in a way where they traveled for 3 months on slave ships and came to different ports in the United States and other parts of the Caribbean and such. And what happened is they were put into a modern situation in which they were forced to leave behind the aspects of their culture that weren't essential. Only what was essential could survive. So that's actually what happened. So then what you actually have for the first time is a truly African, but really African American sensibility forming in the New World, so that you have the integration of certain sensibilities, certain spiritual conceptions, certain ritual practices that are adapted. One being, and this is important, one being the ring shout. The ring shout is a ritual in which they get in a circle, right? And this happens at different transitional points in life. So it happens at funerals, for example. It's a spiritual ceremony where they walk in a counterclockwise motion. Now, check this out. And they're walking slow, and there's music, there's clapping, and then an individual will go in the center of the circle and dance their own dance. So you've got the group, but you've got the individuality. And they come back, someone else goes in, and they do their dance and their interpretation. There's a book called Slave Culture by a late, great historian named Sterling Stuckey, in which he talks about this ring shout being foundational for the creation of the spirituals in the 19th century for Black Americans. Ralph Ellison said that the spirituals were the first runnings, the first really indications of the creation of a new people, where through that folk culture, you have a symbolic representation of the actual values of those people. So you have, but it's not only African. They're surrounded by, European traditions. They're surrounded by all of these different things, and they're assimilating and carrying both, and they are influencing the slave masters, and they're influencing the culture at the same time. So American culture is actually a vernacular culture. This is from the work of John A. Coleman, who was very influential on both Albert Murray, my mentor, and Ralph Ellison. The Beer Can by the Highway was one of his books. You can check it out. He talked about American culture being vernacular, and that vernacular culture is a combination of the learned traditions of Europe and the homespun creativity of creating what you can based on the resources right around you, American tradition. You have those things that come together that create an American culture. Then you have Constance Rourke, who talks about specific mythic types in America. You've got the Yankee, you've got the backwoodsman, right? You've got the Black American. Now, these are more modern terms. That's not the term she used. She didn't say the N-word, but she said the American Negro type. And you have these types that form the foundation of a fundamental American character, okay? In fact, she called her book American Humor, not just because it talked about the comedic tradition, but because she talked about humor as a kind of character, American character. So there's been a lot of work done on this polyglot mixture, hybridity, all of that stuff is really what American culture is. And Black American culture is a big part of it. So if we look, earlier I said what? I'm 80% sub-Saharan African, 18% European, 2% East Asian, and Native American. My mentor, Albert Murray, would call that omni-American. That's an all-American mixture. It's a mixture of these different components. Now, that's biological, but culturally, we're even more mixed. But as Ralph Ellison said, we kind of get afraid of that pluralism. We get afraid of it and then we end up going back into our own ethnic, racial, religious corners because it's easier there. That mixture piece is really tough for people. And I'll end with this, at least this part, by saying that Robert O'Mealy, literature professor at Columbia University, who I've known and have worked with over the years, once recounted a story of Ralph Ellison speaking to a group of white and black students. And he said, what you white students need to know is that you part black, and what you black students need to know is that you part white. Now, if you can realize that, if you can embrace that, we can get along and we can go a lot further. But boy, you say that to folks, it's whoa, on both sides. It's like, no. But that's the cultural reality. We're a mixture. We're a combination. We're a composite.
Yeah, there aren't many pure race people, I suspect, these days. We're all mongrels.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
But I think there's, this business of, what Africa has. I mean, I see it the way that, at some point, some people decided to leave Africa and went off and look at some other places, and some people, a decision happened there where some people thought let's go and explore, and other people said, no, it's good here, let's deepen our existence here. So you've got a sort of split in perspective that happens there. And it just strikes me that both of those develop two separate sorts of perspectives. And I know all the sort of green postmodern arguments that race is just a social construct and that sort of thing, which of course it has got a relative truth to it all. Race is as a scientific or genetic construct is pretty fuzzy and shabby, really. But it's got a sort of loose patterning to it, and I do feel that people that have tended to have come, from different geographical areas where there have been different survival challenges and different, environments, different climates and things like that, have all evolved different qualities, I think, and that there might not be much genetic difference between us all, but I think there is some. And I think it impoverishes the human race to say that we're all exactly the same, because I don't think we are. I've just got a sense that we've all got different qualities, and I think my vision is that all these different qualities are integrated into a global humanity, and that they bring these different ways of looking at things. And I think that the African perspective is fundamentally and radically different from the European perspective. I mean, it feels to me, really, the European worldview, it's very logic and reason based. It's all about fact and all that sort of thing. In my sort of integral work, a point I make is that human communication has got three dimensions. There's three dimensions in speech. There's rhythm and emphasis, and that communicates, I would say, the I, my sense of I, by putting my rhythm or emphasis on the words. There's a dimension of we in there, which is the musicality. I use intonation to hold you in relationship while I'm bringing these ideas into the space. And then there's another third there, which is the conceptual meaning of the words as sound objects. My view is that in the West, we privilege the objective. So we privilege 1/3 of this dimension, and my sense of the African perspective is that if anything, it's the other way round. It privileges these other dimensions, which gives the African perspective a depth of appreciation and knowledge and development of these other two dimensions that appear, for example, in music. I think music is completely underestimated in terms of the importance and cultural impact it has. We had our education minister saying, well, we're going to cut funding for arts and things like music, and we're going to put the money on the STEM subjects. So I think, well, and that's quite a traditional British Western perspective. But what I don't think he realizes is that the rational perspective is underpinned by these other dimensions. It's an all-quadrant affair, and if you want to develop the rational, you've actually got to develop these other aspects out too. So that's what I see as coming from Black culture, and that's as I was saying to you in email, Greg. This is one reason I think America is this sort of big, powerful, super successful culture, is because of the injection of the perspective that's come in from Black Americans has complexified the culture well beyond what would have been possible if it was just white Europeans there. So the power and place of America on the world stage, it's sort of Black Americans have got a foundational role in that. That's the thing. It's so, but in a way that's that sort of going away from the green idea that race is a social construct, and the green perspective deconstructs it to the impoverishment of the human race, I think. I think whilst I accept the arguments that race is a very fuzzy construct and also a much abused construct, I think there's still something there. There's still an element of truth to it all.
I would just very quickly, if you would, Jeff, say that my only response will be, because I resonate with so much of that. Of course, we have to be careful not to stereotype and all of that stuff. You don't mean it. See, you're not coming from this. So I don't even have to. But there are people watching who may think that it's falling into the stereotype of the European is rational and the African is feeling. Which from a stereotype effect, so in other words, feeling but not intellect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you don't mean that. So, but only thing I will say is that when we talk about, we could probably say Western, European and Western are not synonymous. But I think some of the tendencies of the West in terms of its orientation to meaning has to do with denotative meaning, right? But there's also connotative meaning, which goes into kind of the poetic dimension, the feeling dimension, the dimension where there's multiple layers of meanings of terms and combinations of words that you can put together in a certain way where that feeling tone gets in there too, Yeah. So it's ultimately.
Let me jump in here too, and I've wanted to ask you this, Greg, to just get down into sort of a specific of it, from a cultural point of view.
Right.
How do you see the gangster music, the hip hop culture? Because I know jazz and blues and all that, but there's this other part that it's got a lot of juice, and I think it is necessary, and I think it's part of what's filling out humanity. Is that? But it also is offensive and misogynistic and bling and babes, and it's red. It's what it is. I mean, hello. A lot of it is. So what do you think?
Well, I think that gangster rap in particular was marketed very strongly. With NWA, F the Police, it was marketed very strongly because you have industries that were able to make multi millions of dollars weaponizing an actual expression that comes from particularly urban Black America, but it also transmitted certain stereotypes of violence, materialism, being anti, establishment, having the swagger. This is real Black culture. This is to the extent where Wynton Marsalis, one of the greatest, not only jazz, but European classical musicians in the world, travels so far, to other parts of the world. And he's actually told that he's not authentically Black. Can you believe that? Because of people's perception of hip hop. That's the real thing.
Right.
Okay. So I look at it not just from the artistic expression, which, Like for me, I mean, I look at some, great lyricists. What's his name? Rakim. Eric B. and Rakim. Rakim was a master of lyrics and a master MC. I look at what he wrote, and he was very influenced by jazz, no surprise. Nas, and there are different ones who are very, very lyrically have a lot of depth. But that's not what's really promoted that much. So I'm suspicious about the way industry has promoted and popularized hip hop. Okay, so that's my response regarding that. Particularly when you have now jazz. Look, the market is the market. So jazz was the popular art form of the country in the 30s after the Depression, the big band era, and people are able to dance, and they get over the Depression. Then you move through the 40s, World War II, got over that, In the 50s, you start to have R&B music and rock and roll starting to bubble up. So by the 60s, and this is your people, Philip, the British invasion.
You started all this.
I don't mean originally, though. We can go back there. I mean the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones and such. That's when.
Well, they too were offensive. I can't get no satisfaction. Let's spend the night together, sneering and prancing and dressing up, and that was
sensibilities of the day.
Yeah.
Today they were pretty obnoxious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, but my parents, I was so happy that they turned my parents off because that was their job again.
Right.
Yeah.
So you have some of those impulses that are in certain aspects, kind of outlaw culture aspects of American culture that preceded hip hop. That as a legatee of.
Yeah.
But the market decided, and the help of marketing and business forces, to promote popular culture. Popular culture is the big behemoth, fine art. Jazz is a fine art. So when you talk about fine art, you're talking about something that you actually need to be educated to it. I mean, integral meta theory is a very fine art theory. You have to have some underpinning and education to really grok it. That's just the reality. But that's not really pushed. So that's my emphasis, the high end of Black American culture, because I know that in its execution and in its underlying values and principles, that it's exhibiting not only the best of Black American culture, but it's actually democracy and sound. And I can show that very easily. So, I appreciate some of it, but I've never really been a hip hop head, because at the same time that hip hop was starting to really bubble up in the late 70s, I'm in Staten Island, it's bubbling up in the Bronx. I'm in a housing complex, 6 stories, and there are people downstairs in the driveway in the back with turntables and beating. And I'm saying, oh, that's interesting. And of course, there's certain songs that are popular that you learn the lyrics to and you're bopping your head. But this is the time when I'm checking out Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie and Clifford Brown and, John Coltrane. And I'm learning to scat their solos and stuff. So I'm like, what my teacher, and it wasn't fair, but they asked Albert Murray what he thought of hip hop. And he said, man, it sounds like they just got out of slavery. Now I wouldn't go that far, but there is something to that.
Yeah.
There's something to that, So that's kind of what I think of that, hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah. Phil, what do you think?
Yes, well, yes, I don't know. I'm not sure if I got much to comment on that particular topic. I'm certainly interested to hear Greg's perspective on that. It's an interesting thing. Hip hop. I don't know if I actually do quite like some of it. I do quite, not the really angry stuff.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. I mean, because part of it's perhaps I can remember oh gosh, what was it? I think it was, there was some music festival, perhaps it's some gay pride thing, but there was some hip hop artist on who was playing this really highly charged music, and the whole stage just had, the whole area just had a black audience. And the thing that I became aware of is just the sort of racial contrast. And there was a bit of a sense of where I thought, oh my gosh, that's actually quite intimidating. But I also thought, well, how would I feel if I was white? I might actually think, whoa, I like the energy in this one. Because, obviously, if it's playing into these sort of quite earthy, sort of ethnocentric perspectives, one man's scary is another man's sort of powerful energy. Yeah. So, I found that quite interesting. But it's an interesting music form. But I'm a bit with you, Jeff. It's a little bit too red for me.
Well, what I would also point out is that there's all kinds of red culture that aren't related to race. If you think of heavy metal music, very nihilistic. If you think of video games, the Japanese, have the most horrible video games, I mean, from a certain perspective. And so I would note that these art forms have come online with a ever-increasing sensitivity and pacification of the populations who listen to them and imbibe them. And I think that's worth noting. And I would take some issue with you, Greg, in that, yes, of course, there was the orange corporate forces pushing them out into the world, but there were also ears to hear it.
No doubt. I got you absolutely right. Yeah. That was the missing part of my analysis, because if there wasn't an audience for it to buy it, then
and a lot of the ears to hear it, even the urban, so-called black stuff, are white teenagers. I mean, I think there's something about that is actually
there's pro and con to that, and the pro is that there are people who come up, of that generation, who identify with that, that's a part of their music. So therefore, an aspect of Black American culture is a part of their own identity. But I think the negative part is what I alluded to, is that some of them are looking at this as real Black culture.
Yeah, no,
this is like, I'm getting an inside track to the real thing. And it's a partial part of it. And some of that a lot of it's performative. You got Black middle class, very well-educated folks who are acting as if, in some cases, acting as if they come from the street, and they did this and that. They grew up on Long Island in middle class Long Island.
They had chickens, for God's sakes.
So, so there's a performative aspect to this, people taking on characters and that kind of, that's
fair enough. And it's all part of the soup. I do think that in the sacred world to come, though, we're going to have more fuck you energy online than we do now.
Than we do now. There's a lot of FU energy out here, and just the polarities alone.
Yes, I know there are, but I think it'll be integrated. I think there is something, I think red is still very repressed. There's a healthy aspect of it that is just, get your hands off of me, and just look at me. And then what are you looking at? And there's some, but in a more developed system, if you will, where there's the layers of civilization, the layers of rationality, the layers of sensitivity that come online in the post-red, and even faithfulness and obedience in a certain way that comes on with blue or amber, that red is fun. And that our progeny, who have integrated it, will look back on us and say, oh, those poor repressed people.
I would just very quickly say, I think you're right. There's a theory based on integral theory and spiral dynamics called Volution theory by Peter Mary. And he and Dylan Newcomb, the integralist and dancer, worked together on some of this. And this theory basically says that, it's hard to summarize a theory in this so short, but if you have beige being the first level, right? And then purple, the transition from purple to red was not transcend and include, it was transcend and repress what came before. He looks at beige and purple as yin energies. He looks at red, blue, orange, and green as yang energies. And then second tier, yellow and turquoise as yin, again, integrating what came before. So I mentioned this in the context of some of the earlier discussions as far as like an African underpinning and tapping back into it that we've emailed about, Philip, probably a little more than we've talked about here. And that is something where, yes, we've got to integrate all of it, not just the red, beige and purple too, without
absolutely.
without going to the, pre-trans fallacy.
Right.
Yeah, we have to.
Yeah. So what would we say would be that essence of purple or that essence of magenta? I would say deep community, initiation. It's where the ego is subsumed by the whole. Yeah, ritual. Mm-hmm. And then beige would be an embeddedness in nature, where we would realize that we're part of this wind in the sky. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
And we're working on all of that, I think. And also the red fuck you. I'm on my way. I'm my own person. I break out of this. And I think all of those need to be drunk up. And we're doing it, slow but sure. Actually, not so slow in the last, Jesus Christ, I can't keep up.
Yeah, it's all going pretty mad.
Anyway, so any closing thoughts, gentlemen? Maybe Phil, we'll start with you, and then we'll ask you, Greg. And what fun this has been.
Yeah, it's been very nice chatting to both of you, actually. It's nice to speak to you in the cyber flesh, as it were. It would be great.
Phil, what's your website, and how might people check out your work?
Oh, well, it's on integralworld.net, which is just a website that you probably... Is it integralworld.com? I think that's the URL. Anyone searching on that for Philip Anderson should find the writing that I've written. So.
Great. Philip Anderson on Integral World.
Yeah.
All right. Right on. Yeah. Mr. Greg.
I would just say thank you, Jeff, for the invite and for having us on Daily Evolver. Phil, it's been great we've been Facebook friends and have, done posts in private and now emails. This is the first time we're literally seeing one another at the same time. So it's great to engage and interact with you. I just feel gratitude. I just feel gratitude for the opportunity to share and engage and interact with you both, talking about, issues that are very important for our time, that have to do with the past, but that have to do with the future we're trying to build together. So I feel a spirit of gratitude and appreciation. So thank you.
Greg, why is it that every time you talk, I want to say hallelujah at the end? That's
because whether you know it or not, I've got some real strong Christian underpinning.
Must be. Me too.
On my mother's side, it was Pentecostal holiness. On my dad's side, it was African Methodist Episcopal, more straight-laced, more, Episcopal.
Yeah.
So I have both of those as underpinnings of my my style. That's the gospel side of my jazz gospel continuum. So I think you're kind of feeling that, man.
I do too. Yay. Yeah. So, I trust you will bring more of that to us in your new podcast. And
Thank you.
What do we know about that, and how can people find out more about you?
Thank you so much. The company that my wife and I have is called Jazz Leadership Project. So you can check out jazzleadershipproject.com. But the blog, tuneintoleadership.com, is our content extension, where we take the principles and practices of jazz and deal with leadership, development, business, but of late, social and cultural issues very primarily and prominently. And we're going to be launching, I'd say before the year's out, a podcast. So people, I would urge you to go to tuneintoleadership.com and subscribe so that twice a week, Mondays and Fridays, you can get our posts and keep in touch.
Yeah. Fabulous. You and your wife, Jewel,
Yes.
beautiful jewel.
Yes.
And tuneintoleadership.com.
Yes.
Right.
That's
All right.
it.
Well, thank you so much, Greg Thomas. Thank you so much, Phil Anderson. More to come. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Daily Evolver. See you next time.